From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. And with you once again, I am joined as always by my co-host Derek, aka D for 3. Derek, real hoops are on the menu this week, because that's kind of our bag as well, so please, tip us off.
Yeah, so on today's episode, we will be discussing what having a bag means as it relates to basketball. Included in this discussion, we will name players past and present that we believe had the deepest offensive bag. However, first, it's important to note why we are having this discussion, Andrew. Former NBA star Paul Pierce, along with former player Danny Green, sparked significant debate by stating Michael Jordan had a limited bag of offensive moves compared to modern players, arguing Jordan relied more on athleticism and dominance rather than complex dribbling sequences, a take that drew strong reactions from figures like Kevin Garnett. We're going to get into that in a moment. But Paul Pierce's view, which he stated on the No Fouls Given podcast and other platforms, Pierce explained that Jordan's bag was limited to 1 or 2 dribble pull-ups and simple moves, but he was so dominant that he didn't need more. He used his strength to get to the basket. And Danny Green agreed. He stated that while Jordan had skills, his bag wasn't as vast as some modern players, noting Jordan's efficiency meant he didn't need to dance around as much. So the best reaction to this actually came from Kevin Garnett. And Kevin Garnett stated, "The definition of a bag to me is having a barrage of moves to get to the cup and score the ball, period. To say Michael Jordan has a limited bag, but he was arguably the best scorer in our history, what the is the definition of a bag then? His bag was 1, 2, 3, pull up, 1 dribble, pull up, get by you, dunking the ball, 3 ball, whatever the spin, post, however you want it, Lord. A bag is being able to get in traffic and make a traffic decision, and boom, you make it right there. And on top of that, Michael Jordan was one of the more aggressive offensive players. Oh man, can't nobody guard that motherfucker today." And yeah, he goes on a little bit further, but yeah, he was not happy with the fact that Paul Pierce and Danny Green made those comments about Michael Jordan having a limited bag, and he disagrees with their definition of a bag, as I do as well. And I disagree with much of the younger generation, the way they think about a bag as it relates to basketball and offensive skills. So what was your first reaction to this, and do you agree with KG?
Oh, I definitely agree with KG over Danny Green and Paul Pierce. Yeah, it seems like they were on where the good old heads grift. We're the ones that agree that the modern game is far superior, far more evolved than anything that those plumbers and dentists, to use that rhetoric, were doing back in the day. It seems like they were on that grift, from the sounds of it. Yeah, absolutely agree with KG. You know, you look at some of the modern dribbling, and this is a point that you've made before and other people have made as well, that they've changed what constitutes a carry, a travel, things like that, that you can make moves that they could have done back in the day, and people were doing in street ball for a long time, and one, but you couldn't do in the NBA. So when people talk about a bag, I think they're often dazzled by some of the dribbling moves that are allowed these days that older players definitely could have done, but would have been whistled for a carry.
For example, the step through that they allow now, where you completely disengage from your pivot foot, and it looks absolutely ridiculous. And anybody who grew up with basketball prior to the last 4 or 5 years of the NBA laugh whenever they see this. They're like, "This is ridiculous. This was never allowed before.
So when we do it,
why is this being allowed now? Why are players allowed to leave their pivot? Why is this step through allowed? Why are they allowing this gather step? Why is this player allowed to take 3 steps? Why is this person going sideways after picking up his dribble, taking 2 steps sideways and being allowed to get away with it? Why is he allowed to do the same thing going backwards?" All of that. I also want to point out that the shooting percentage on moves that I just brought up, that I'm discussing, for the most part, especially the shooting, stepping sideways, stepping back, all that stuff, is incredibly low. And I want to get into that in a second as it relates to the definition of having a bag. But first, I want to get into what Jordan's bag is, in my opinion. So these are all the things that he excelled at. Fadeaway over either shoulder, post fadeaway, 1 dribble pull-up, up and unders, straight up and down jump shot, off 1 foot fadeaway, incredible first step, the ability to contort his body in the air in many different ways to finish, a crossover, the hesitation dribbles, the behind-the-back dribbles, between the legs dribbles, step backs, threes when necessary, elevating above the defense, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much more. But that just touches on some of it. And the threes with necessary piece is he's even talked about it. He thought that he was more effective inside the three-point line. He was so dominant inside the three-point line. Why go out and shoot a lower percentage shot? But I've brought this up before. Jordan's three-point shooting in his first 3 title runs in the playoffs, remember, the line was not moved in. This is when it mattered. This is when he was shooting a little bit more of them because he thought it would help at the time. 1991, full playoff run, 38.5%. 1992, 38.6%. 1993, 38.9%. Total, 55 for 142, 38.7%. And then in LeBron's first 3 title runs, playoffs, 2012, 25.9%, 2013, 37.5%, 2016, 34%. And his total percentage, 90 for 275, 32.7%. The point is that Jordan, when he needed to, when it suited the situation, could be a knockdown three-point shooter. But he was so dominant inside the three-point line that he didn't do that as much. And I consider a three-point shot in his bag because of this. I also don't think that you have to be a 3-level scorer in general to have a deep bag or one of the deepest bags in basketball history. What are your thoughts on Jordan's bag, and do you find his bag more limited than anybody today?
I don't see how it is. Not when he had so many ways to paralyze the defense, to get his shot off and shoot so well as he did in so many high-scoring games in his career. Yeah, I don't get that limited bag at all. Again, I think it comes down to the flashiness of dribbling moves, which, as I've said before, you see a lot of players make these really fancy dribbles in place, these supposedly fancy size-ups that do absolutely nothing. They create no space.
They're not going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere. Creates no space, and it looks flashy, don't get me wrong. Certainly there's coordination involved, but it doesn't actually do anything. And a simple move, or a move that doesn't look as flashy with the ball, that creates space, that gets the defender off balance, that allows the player to create that space, get that shot off, that is far more impressive than a flashier move that does absolutely nothing. Again,
and they shoot low percentages off of a lot of those moves.
Exactly.
That's the point that I'm trying to make too. You'll see some players now, and they're doing this completely unnecessary dribbling in place, and it turns into like a sidestep three or a backing up three, and they shoot such a low percentage on those shots. They're not operating using instincts. They're not catching and going. They're not executing, off of that one dribble pull up. They're not doing the most effective moves, in my opinion, on the basketball court and making the defense have to react quick. For example, I remember this conversation happening when James Harden was at the peak of his game, and they were talking about, James Harden has maybe the deepest bag in NBA history. I think it was Scott Van Pelt who made a comment similar to that, right? And there was comments about him having a deeper bag than Jordan. How? I never understood that. Sure, he would fancy dribble a lot. Sure, he would bait to get to the line all the time. He could knock down the three and everything, but he was not even a quarter of the player as Jordan was at the rim, going to the hoop, in the mid-range, being able to do what Jordan could do back to the basket. Every single aspect of James Harden's game inside the three-point line was far inferior to Michael Jordan's, right? So I never understood that. And it was based off of the dribbles, right? Because if Harden wasn't dribbling like that and doing the things that he was doing, which was mostly like at the top of the key in one-on-one situations, then they never would have made those comments. Not only that, the way Harden was allowed to dribble in his prime, in those years where he was getting those comments, and today, playing for the Clippers and whatnot, the dribble moves are so much more lenient for him today than they were for players back in Jordan's day and further back and whatnot. Jordan couldn't even get away with those dribbles for the most part, even if he could do them or tried to do them back in his day. So that's context as it relates to that. But even if you allow that to be part of the discussion, he's still not even close to as good as Michael Jordan inside the three-point line in any way, shape, or form.
And there were so many moves that MJ made, that fake spin and pivot into that up and under in the paint, so effective. In the post, became a fantastic post player. I was going to say a fantastic post player for a guard, which he certainly was, but I think just in general, you don't even have to qualify it. Was he Hakeem Olajuwon? Very few people are or were Hakeem Olajuwon, but MJ was certainly a great post player on top of being able to slash and shoot, rise up over the defender. And to that point, I wonder if you could also include, as part of what constitutes a player's bag, as how they finish. Because, of course, with MJ, you had the acrobatic layups. You had the switching to the left hand.
Of course it matters. It's coordination.
Yeah.
It's touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to finish with the left hand, switch in midair, make that adjustment, elude the defense. You look at somebody like Derrick Rose, for example, having a great bag as well, being able to kiss the ball off the glass the way he did with those acrobatic layups. That has to be part of having a bag, not just the dribble setup moves. That is definitely part of it, obviously, but also the way you finish, the way once you get into the air that you can make those adjustments, the way that you have that shooting touch. It's all part of it.
If you drive down the lane and you jump into a defender who's coming at you and you absorb that contact and you're able to adjust your shot and finish, that's skill. That's part of your bag. And if you can do that more often than not, then you can absolutely call it part of somebody's bag. If you can routinely go baseline and leap into the air and finish on the opposite side of the hoop and kiss it off the glass, that involves touch. That involves skill. If that's something that teams have to constantly worry about when you go baseline, that can be part of your bag. Consistency matters when you talk about a player having a bag. I could go out and hit a three-quarter court shot, right? But how many of those am I going to hit consistently? So you can't say that I have a three-quarter court shot in my bag just because you saw me hit one, right? And I think that's part of the problem here. Somebody can do fancy dribbles and not go anywhere the majority of the time and shoot a poor percentage off of the dribble. But because it looks good, somebody will say that it's part of their bag. Like, oh, they have a deep bag, even though they don't hit shots consistently off of it and don't really go anywhere. LeBron James, I don't think he really has a mid-range shot in his bag. He's a career in the 30% range mid-range shooter. He misses far more often than not. Most of LeBron's points are either behind the three-point line or, obviously, most in his career are in the paint. But I don't think that you can really say that LeBron is a consistent three-level scorer, and you can't really include mid-range shots in LeBron James' bag, in my opinion, because I think consistency matters. And he shoots a high enough volume of them where it matters. The other point is that when you look at today's game and you see those rule changes and what players are allowed to get away with now, how can you say that, SGA has this step-through move, right? Never seen that one before. It wasn't even allowed in Jordan's era, the coming off of the pivot, all of that stuff. How can you say that SGA has that in his bag and Jordan doesn't when Jordan wasn't even allowed to do that in his day? So, in the same with the things like gather step, all of that stuff, these side step threes, the step back threes, they changed the rules of basketball, right? And I think that matters here when it comes to context.
It absolutely does. There's a great YouTube channel, Ryan Van Dusen. You've probably seen it. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have seen it as well, always posting some great classic clips. And he's posted a couple of early Eurostep videos showing players trying to get away with that Eurostep in the 80s and early 90s. And it's getting waved off, getting called to travel. They could do it, and they had the idea and the ability to do it, but it wasn't allowed. Absolutely. And you talk about choice of where to operate, and Michael Jordan not always being a volume three-point shooter, having that in his bag, but not always pulling it out of his bag, so to speak. You look at Steph Curry in his MVP years, taking that many threes. Are we to look at that and say, he's hardly operating inside the arc. Can he not finish at the rim or shoot in the mid-range? That would be absolutely absurd to say, because we do see him take mid-range shots and make them. We do see him knife into the paint, put up that floater, and be pretty effective. We've even seen Steph Curry dunk. So the idea that we look at stats, and that's the other thing, Derek, box score watchers that just base everything off numbers, not even watching the game, certainly not knowing the game, just extrapolating from out-of-context stats.
Yeah, I do think that the whole bag thing has a lot to do with two things. One, the whole, how does the person's dribbling look, right? Does it look cool? Does it look modern, all of that. And the whole 3-level scorer thing. Oh, he can score from all 3 levels. He can hit threes. I've seen him hit a mid-range shot, and he can score at the rim. I've seen that guy dunk great. Like that guy's got to be a 3-level scorer. And nobody cares about the percentages or how consistent these guys are doing this. It doesn't matter how effective the moves are. It's all aesthetic. It's all how it looks. And the funny thing is that oftentimes, in my opinion, it looks ugly. I think that, dribbling in place and not going anywhere is kind of like an ugly brand of basketball. It takes your teammates out of the game, allows the defense to relax, all of that. I think that a lot of the whole not operating in the mid-range today excludes a lot of these guys from being able to be called 3-level scorers, because they're not even operating in those areas. They're not operating back to the basket most of the time. They're not getting in the mid-range and consistently shooting those shots or consistently hitting those shots. I think that if I had to give my definition of having a deep bag, it would be, the ability to have an effective arsenal of offensive moves. And arsenal meaning volume, right? Like a bunch of different moves that you can go to and be effective doing them. For example, Hakeem Olajuwon, right? Like I would say that Hakeem Olajuwon, despite not being able to dribble on the perimeter like a guy like Banchero, or didn't step out and shoot threes like Banchero, Hakeem Olajuwon has a much deeper bag than Banchero. Kevin Garnett has a much deeper bag than Joel Embiid, in my opinion, even though Joel Embiid's out there consistently shooting threes at times. I think that context matters, and I think that the consistency related to how often you can execute those moves. Are they true go-to moves? How effective are they? All of that. I think that matters.
It does. And we can go back even further. Obviously, the whole we're done with the 90s. That is the decade that people are dumping on. But you go back further, you've got Pistol Pete Maravich, you got Bob Cousy. Yes, some of the dribbling moves don't look like modern moves because, again, the rules have changed, but they definitely were fancy, and they were skilled and under control. And we can go beyond the NBA here. The Harlem Globetrotters, Marcus Haynes, Curly Neal, some of the most iconic ball handlers in basketball history, renowned for their fancy moves.
Yeah, I think the deepest bag that I've ever seen is Michael Jordan. I think he had the deepest offensive bag, just the plethora of moves, all the different ways that he could finish, how effective he was with those moves. And, some other guys that I thought just were incredible from a bag perspective and the way they could finish and the different ways they could score, Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter at his peak, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, which I already mentioned, James Worthy. I think James Worthy had just so many different moves around the hoop, different ways that he could finish, and just he was so effective in those areas. Larry Bird, sure, wasn't putting the ball on the court, like Steph Curry or Allen Iverson, but being able to fade over either shoulder, off one feet, off both feet, his ability to hit the three, his ability to, play back to the basket, turn either way, finish around the rim. Those are all part of having a bag. Allen Iverson, just so impressive to me, the way he could, get into the middle of the lane and shoot over anybody, fading straight up and down, going forward, going sideways. It didn't matter. And his plethora of dribbling moves, which I thought were so effective because he didn't over dribble most of the time. When he went into a move, it was like a quick first step, or it was a quick crossover, or a quick double crossover, or a quick spin move, and he was moving. And I find Allen Iverson's game far more appealing to watch. And I felt like he was far more effective as a scorer at times because he went fast and he was quick and decisive and whatnot. Those are some names from the past that come to mind. For today's NBA, I think Steph Curry just has an incredible bag. And I think that out of all players in the NBA, he uses his dribble best. I think that there's hardly any wasted dribbles with Curry. He gets to his spot. If he gets into an ISO situation, it's one or two quick moves and boom, he's shooting over the defense. Or boom, he takes a step back and then he crosses over to the other hand after he gets the guy in the air and now he's in the mid-range or he's going downhill. When he shoots in the mid-range, it is definitely part of his bag. He shoots a very good percentage from that area, and he also finishes well at the rim. I think his bag is incredible overall and one of the best I've ever seen. Anthony Edwards can get into the mid-range. He has the little post fadeaway. He doesn't elevate like Mike. He's not as consistent as Mike, even in this NBA where he gets a little bit more space and whatnot. He's not overall the athlete that Jordan was, especially from a speed and elevation perspective overall. But I think he has a pretty solid bag where he can score in multiple different ways and be effective. Kevin Durant, obviously, he's a professional scorer, etc. So, yeah, for bags, those are the names I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, I think you've covered a lot of the players that have some of the best bags currently and in NBA history. I'll throw Wemby out as a player who is definitely working on his. I'm not saying that it's all the way there yet, but I can see that he's trying to have that deep bag. We'll see how it goes. I want to throw out a player that I've mentioned a little bit over the past couple of years or so, Elvin Hayes. And I mentioned Elvin Hayes because I added him to my NBA 2K10 fixed official roster with missing legends. I'm working on adding a few more legends to that roster. And to do that, I went back and looked at some Elvin Hayes footage. Wanted to see the Big E in action. Because, of course, I have seen him in action before, but it's been a while, and I'd forgotten some of his moves, his offensive game. Wanted to remind myself of what he was like on the court, because obviously, before our time, Derek. And I'm seeing him put the ball on the floor, spin baseline out of the post for dunks, put the ball on the floor to go in for a driving layup. Those turnarounds in the mid-range and in the post, a great shooting touch. But you look at some of the shooting percentages from his career, and you'd say, oh, he can't shoot. He doesn't have a shooting touch. Well, they didn't really prize efficiency back then, but he absolutely had that shooting touch. He could knock it down in the mid-range. Again, a big man back in the day had that range. Bob McAdoo was another one, as you know. So if you don't...
I was about to bring up Bob McAdoo.
Exactly.
I was about to say, you're revisiting the 70s. You had to see some Bob McAdoo footage and talk about a bag.
Absolutely.
For, with the rules that limited these players, he could put the ball on the floor. He got up and down the floor very well, sometimes as a one-man fast break. He was consistently hitting all of those mid-range shots, was great back to the basket, averaged over 30 points per game. Yeah, Bob McAdoo had a bag.
3 straight years, averaging 30-plus per game. One of the few players to do that in NBA history. Absolutely. And if you don't go back and look, if you just look at stats, and you're not familiar with these players, you don't know. And you assume, especially with the assumptions these days, that skill wasn't a thing until the 2000s or even the 2010s. So that is an important point to remember when people talk about who has a bag and limited bags and bags not being as deep back in the day. People don't go back and watch the footage, or they don't look at it in context. They don't see the fancy dribbling, again, in large part because the and one influence wasn't there, the rules hadn't changed. They're looking at flash over substance. They're not seeing that, oh, Elvin Hayes is putting the ball on the floor. He's posting up and making these quick spins and dunking it. He's hitting from the top of the key. He's making these turnarounds from a great distance. We think about turnaround fadeaways as a Michael Jordan thing, or a Kobe thing, or a more modern thing, not a pre-3-point line era thing. But here is Elvin Hayes doing it. And he wasn't the only one, of course, but that was one of his go-to moves. That was in his bag.
Yeah, when I was talking about past players that had a bag, obviously Hakeem Olajuwon, I didn't mention his name, but I did mention him earlier in the show. Incredible bag, just unstoppable on the block, unstoppable in the mid-range, unstoppable around the rim. So many go-to moves and efficient with those go-to moves. He could also put the ball on the floor. I saw him, multiple times take big men, from the high post and even sometimes the 3-point line to the rim, including crossing up Robert Parrish and throwing it down. Hakeem Olajuwon, just incredibly deep bag. There's some power forwards in the 90s that I also thought had incredible bags offensively. The young Larry Johnson was absolutely ridiculous. His footwork was silly. And he could also go out and hit that mid-range shot. Young Vin Baker, just awesome to watch. That footwork was incredible. Yeah. Mick Dice before his injuries. Antonio McDice had a plethora of moves, at that power forward position. LaFonso Ellis as well showed super high potential and had incredible flashes. He was a 20-point scorer in the NBA, but, without the injuries, I felt like he could have been even better. But there was a lot of power forwards in the 90s and early mid-2000s that I thought had incredibly deep bags, great footwork, and they didn't have to dribble fit on the perimeter or try to show flashy dribbling to either be effective or to look good while they were playing basketball. They were awesome.
And I'll throw one out there that I'm surprised you didn't mention because you have a similar name. Yours is spelled differently, of course. Derek Coleman.
Yeah, one of the knocks on Derek Coleman was that he over-dribbled.
Yes.
If you remember correctly, it was his over-dribbling and his shot selection. A lot of people thought he took too many outside shots, that he shied away from the paint a little bit too much, that he was kind of a selfish player. And that style of play now, that dribble fit, the whole over-dribbling, dribbling the ball into the court, and then taking a contested shot, right? Going nowhere with it, that's almost praised now, and that's considered having a bag. But Derek Coleman was talked about poorly when he did.
Absolutely. And of course it didn't help that he had kind of a poor attitude as far as work ethic and so forth.
Correct. So before we get to the community's responses to this week's mailbag, describe what having a bag looks like to you, Andrew.
It's having more than just one go-to move. It's having a plethora of moves that can set you up to score reliably. And these are moves that you pull out of your bag of tricks, consistently and effectively. In a nutshell, I think that's what having a bag is.
Yeah, I think having an arsenal of moves where only one or two are super effective doesn't mean that you have a deep bag. Again, going back to my example, I can hit a three-quarter court three, but I'm not going to hit that at a consistent rate. So that shot is not in my bag. I think that the arsenal needs to be consistent. It needs to be effective, and it needs to be a true go-to to be considered part of a player's bag.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, ma-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So getting to the community's responses to this week's mailbag, I asked, describe what having a bag looks like to you, and name a couple players past and present that you believe had a deep bag. Leo at Real Kiwi Mamba states, a player having the required skill, ball handling, footwork, and or shooting range to create and score a bucket no matter what the defense does. Players with the deepest bags that come to mind include Jordan, Kobe, Iverson, McGrady, Bird, Hakeem, Melo, and Kyrie. And Melo has a deep bag, right? He can definitely be mentioned out of past players, the ability to face up and shoot over the defense. Just an absolute nightmare to guard one-on-one. He was also incredibly good back to the basket. And I like the way he described that. A player having the required skill to create and score a bucket no matter what the defense does.
Absolutely. And you use the term professional scorer to describe Kevin Durant. That obviously applies to MJ and Kobe. But, Melo as well.
Steven at the Live King states, bag is just go-to moves to score. Doesn't necessarily have to be dribble moves. James Harden hop step back. Kobe turnaround fade from the free throw line. Jordan fade from the baseline. The sky hook is a prime example. Couldn't stop it. Exactly. And he's talking about players that could do things consistently and efficiently. And those moves can be part of that person's bag. And, Jordan would be able to absolutely torch you without over dribbling once in a game. It can be that one dribble pull up. Next play down floor, He's hitting you with a fade over the left shoulder. Next play down the floor, fade over the right shoulder. Next play, he's throwing it down on you. Then he's going, baseline and hitting a reverse layup on you. Then he's bodying up with you going down the lane and scoring on you. That was all part of his bag.
And we should also mention part of the skill here is knowing when to pull certain tricks out of the bag and reading the defense and taking what the defense gives you, in addition to trying to force the defense into contending with whatever you're pulling out of the bag, also being able to pick and choose.
Andrew at Andrew the X states, a bag to me is when a ball handler has a big enough skill set and fundamentals to get a good shot regardless of how defense is playing you. MJ and Kobe obviously come to mind. Larry Bird, Paul Pierce, Hakeem. And one that others might not mention, but definitely had a bag, was Brandon Roy. And yeah, we remember all the moves that Brandon Roy could pull off. Kind of part of that, Kobe Bryant, Tracy McGrady, Vince Carter cloth. In a way, just the way that he could get to his spots, the smooth game, the one dribble pull up, the footwork, all of that stuff. Definitely, had a deep bag.
Yeah, just a damn shame that Brandon Roy's knees couldn't hold up. One of those players that's kind of forgotten these days. And, that's a whole other point that we could dedicate a whole show to. But when people talk about the level of skill of any given era, there are a lot of players that kind of fizzled out because of injuries, or they're just simply forgotten because they didn't have enough flashy highlights, or simply aren't talked about enough by the talking heads that drive the discourse. But yeah, Brandon Roy, a fantastic player in the late 2000s there.
Mike P for 3 at Mike Pritchard states, for me, it's being a complete 3-level scorer, post drive, mid-range, and 3-point shooting. In my mind, I'd even give Kobe the slight edge over Jordan in terms of the bag due to Kobe being a better 3-point shooter, but maybe that's because Kobe's era shot more threes. I would completely disagree with that, but I understand where he's coming from, and I think that's kind of how a lot of the kids look at it today. I don't think Kobe was nearly as efficient in pretty much anything that he did in comparison to Jordan, despite having a few more seasons as a better 3-point shooter when he took more and whatnot. Everything inside the 3-point line I give to Jordan from an efficiency perspective, from a smoothness perspective, the way he could get to his spots, how he could finish on traffic, and the field goal percentages a lot of times to reflect that. I think Kobe came into the NBA at a time where dribbling rules were a little bit more lenient, and you saw some of that in his game. You saw a little and one style in Kobe's game, a little Allen Iverson in Kobe's game, the wide crossovers, the hand on the side of the ball, all of that. Little bit more flair with the dribble, but was he more effective with it? And that's the point that I was making earlier in the show. He was not more effective with his dribble than MJ. From my viewing, I think Jordan got to his spots better and he was more in control. As a 3-point shooter, Kobe also took quite a few more in his career, and was a career 32.9% from downtown, while Jordan shot 32.7% for his career with one full season extra with that moved in line. But Jordan didn't really start shooting threes of more than one per game until like 89-90, where he took 3 a game, and he actually shot 37.6% that season, Andrew. 90-91, he only took 1.1 per game, shot 31.2%. So anyways, from a 3-point shooting perspective, I don't think Kobe was really far superior. I think he took more, and that was what was happening in the NBA as Kobe was coming up.
And I'll also say that while Kobe was multi-talented, obviously, and very smooth a lot of the time, there were moments where he was kind of predictable with his moves, kind of stiffened up, started going into that same jerky juke movement, and a savvy defender, especially a savvy defender with length, was often able to kind of impede him. And sometimes at really big moments. We saw Tayshaun Prince in the 2004 finals. We saw Kevin Durant in the playoffs one year really bother Kobe, just not falling for the moves, seeing them coming, using their length effectively. So, if nothing else, I think MJ was able to use his bag a bit more creatively and effectively.
Kobe was out of control more often, and he wasn't as good of an athlete as Jordan either. He wasn't as strong as Jordan. Many former players have come out and stated that. He wasn't as strong as Jordan. He couldn't elevate like Jordan. And just overall, it looked like he just wasn't as strong of a player. And Kobe is a legend Kobe was a fantastic player with an incredibly deep bag and all the moves, and he had tons of success. But I put Jordan ahead of him by a decent margin, in my opinion. T Gentry at Bucky_T states, as it relates to his definition of a bag, just an arsenal and or plethora of ways to attack on the court. I love that. He continues, for past and present players that have a deep bag, he states it's tough, but the players that come to mind are Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Jamal Crawford, Kyrie Irving, and Allen Iverson. And obviously Jamal Crawford, awesome with the dribble, doesn't over dribble, and can get to his spots. So that's a good mention. Roger Ward, Level 1 legend, states, the ability to create your own shot while also being a 3-level scorer. The deepest bags I can think of are Jamal Crawford, Kobe, Anthony Edwards, Baron Davis, and KD. And again, I think that's where there's a big disconnect there. I don't think that being a quote-unquote 3-level scorer, as in, hey, this guy shoots more threes and can hit them from out there, or hit them at a decent percentage, I don't think that automatically makes them better or having a deeper bag than somebody who can absolutely dominate inside the 3-point line with a plethora of moves and higher efficiency, etc. Like, I don't think that Baron Davis has a deeper bag than Michael Jordan. I don't think Anthony Edwards has a deeper bag, or Jamal Crawford, etc. And I don't think that they have deeper bags even than, somebody like Tracy McGrady either. I don't think their bags are deeper.
I suppose it's one of those things that you could maybe split hairs on, but you could say there's a difference between a bag of tricks, and tools that a player is using, or stylistically, variation in their game, kind of shooting a little bit from everywhere rather than operating primarily in a couple of areas. But yeah, I'm of the same mind here.
And the last response that we have from X is from Royce. Royce states, hi, Derek. I agree with T. Gentry's take on the bag. I think a lot of players before the current era had the bag, but footage may be hard to find, or not a lot of it is to be seen. He continues, I have to ask, where do handles, ball handling, dribbling, figure into this bag, if at all? Players like Pistol Pete, AI, Kyrie, Jason Williams, Nash, Tim Hardaway, Stockton, Kidd, Luka, Kawhi, The Glove, Human Highlight Film, The Truth, Eddie Jones, Stephon Marbury, Baron Davis, etc. And then female players like Caitlin Clark, Paige Beckers, Sue Bird, Diana Taurasi, and others in both the NBA, ABA, and WNBA, WBL, etc. What about players who could get to spots on the floor and either shoot from or make moves to the basket? Does this figure into the bag? Thinking like Larry Legend, Kobe, his airness, AI, D-Wade, both Clyde Drexler and Walt Frazier, Dan Marley, Ray Allen, Carmelo Anthony, Latrell Sprewell, Allen Houston, Reggie Miller, John Starks, even taller guys like Sam Perkins, Kevin Durant, Jokic, Big Game James, who I brought up earlier. And he states, what about the big men with power or other moves? Would that be considered a bag or not? Is the bag only for wings or point guards, shooting guards, and small forwards? Do bigs or power forwards or centers have their own version of the bag? Guys like McHale, the Chief, Zach Randolph, Mark and Pau Gasol, the Mailman, Sir Charles, the Admiral, Timmy D, the Dream, Bosch, Ewing, Shaq, Zoe, Larry Johnson, the Rain Man, Big Ticket, Dwight Howard, Kenyon Martin, Antonio McDyess, Sheed, Dirk Nowitzki, Kareem, both Sabonis's, Chris Gatling, he got a shout out on the NLSC podcast. He deserves it, though. He's an underrated player. Kevin Willis, PJ Brown, and others. And then he states, Happy New Year to you, Andrew, and the NLSC community. Thank you, Royce. Thanks for always supporting the show. Excellent name dropping there.
Yep.
Some good names. And in my opinion, is you can't exclude players like Bob McAdoo from having a deep bag. Kevin McHale and Hakeem Olajuwon, Charles Barkley, etc. It doesn't have to be fancy dribbling. Like I said, the efficiency of the moves, the efficiency of the player, what you do with that arsenal, how consistent you are with it. I think all of that factors in here. So I think big guys, wings, point guards, etc., they can all be part of the conversation.
Definitely. And as Derek said, Royce, thank you as always for supporting the show and our content. And he also brings up not knowing players, not going back and watching players. And at this point, we might be able to call that the Elvin Hayes argument, if you will. Not having that familiarity with those older players, not watching the footage, just looking at stats, seeing, oh, this player shot 45%, no shooting touch. not efficient, not effective, whatever, they're not looking at the context of how the game was played at the time. They're not looking at footage of the player, seeing that, oh, he could put the ball on the floor. You brought up before people looking at Bob Cousy footage and saying, oh, actually, he could really dribble. Does it completely resemble modern dribbling? Of course not, because again, not to harp on the point, but the rules have changed. But he absolutely had that skill and that ball control. Pistol Pete, another player. It's these players that aren't mentioned enough today. They're not spotlighted. Their highlights aren't shown enough. You can seek them out. They're available on YouTube, but a lot of people aren't doing that. They're just making that assumption, looking at stats, assuming that there was no skill back in the day, not actually doing the research. So that is a huge factor here when we talk about bags.
Well, again, former players making themselves look stupid again.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And saying things that make absolutely no sense. Paul Pierce making that comment, and in another comment, he stated that he had a bigger bag than Michael Jordan, a bigger offensive bag. Why? Because he took and hit more threes? Like, I take Jordan everywhere else on the floor. I actually take Jordan probably shooting threes more than Pierce too, just because it's Michael Jordan and I've seen what he could do also, when it counted. But as far as inside the 3-point line, there isn't one thing that Paul Pierce does better than Michael Jordan. He doesn't elevate like Jordan. He doesn't get to his spots as fast. He doesn't have as many moves. He's not even close to as good back to the basket or around the rim. It's just insulting and stupid. And Danny Green, who has probably one of the weakest bags in basketball history, because not only was he mainly just a 3-point shooter in the NBA, he was notoriously known for not being able to put the ball on the deck, right? He was not good at dribbling the ball, even for a shooting guard. He was not incredibly quick downhill. He was not an incredible finisher around the basket. He didn't have anything super reliable, inside the 3-point line. So Danny Green making that comment is laughable, in my opinion, as well. But just more former player BS, from these stupid podcasts and shows and all of this stuff, and I don't think it's always about trying to get attention. I just think these guys are, they're not always right, and they just sometimes talk out of the side of their mouth.
Yeah, just because you played professional basketball doesn't necessarily make you a great analyst or GM. And hey, while we're being honest, MJ, not the greatest record as an executive, despite being, to my mind, the greatest player of all time. And yeah, can you imagine back in the day, Blue Edwards ripping on Pete Maravich? If he was in the media back then? And Blue Edwards, I certainly enjoyed and respect him as a player who made it to the NBA, but kind of like that Danny Green level of, you're not a star, you shouldn't be ripping on the all-time greats. Right,
but I think it would mean something if they put some true context around it, right? And were able to explain themselves.
It was a good argument,
because there's people that never played in the NBA that, like myself, and some of our NLSC listeners clearly, that can articulate this better, that can explain, what they think a bag is and, what players had the deepest bag. They can explain themselves better. But these guys, a lot of these former players, guys like Gilbert Arenas, like Paul Pierce, like Kendrick Perkins, like Ryan Hollins, etc., just some of the stuff they say makes absolutely no sense.
Michael Jordan scored more points in his rookie season than Ryan Hollins did in his entire career. I just want to put that out there for no reason whatsoever.
So thank you to the community for once again taking part in the mailbag. I felt like that was a healthy conversation, kind of cleansing in a way, because of how kind of just blah that made me feel when I saw that Paul Pierce said that and Danny Green agreed, and then there was a bunch of the younger crowd kind of agreeing with it and all of that stuff. And it's like, yeah, let's pump the brakes and have like a realistic conversation about this.
It's always a shame when you see people with any kind of credibility, people who have made it in the NBA. We talked about Stan Van Gundy's comments a few shows back. People trading on that credibility to dump on the past, or put bad takes out there, or put hot takes out there that don't educate. They're just meant to drive discussion, but they're just putting misinformation out there. We hate it. So, yeah, it's definitely cleansing, Derek, refreshing to push back on those narratives.
Also, I want to point something out. One thing that they stated, which is true, and Kevin Garnett also stated, is that if you have go-to moves, basically, you go to them, and if they're effective, you keep going to them. Right? If Jordan can do a one dribble pull up, and he could do this in any era, get his guy backpedaling and elevate over them and shoot a jump shot, and he can hit that most of the time, then that should be something that he should use more often, right? If Jordan has his back to the basket and he can fade over his shoulder and knock that down, why would he not go to that more often? And what makes that less impressive than somebody dribble fitting at the top of the key and just over dribbling into like a contested three? Why does that person on the 3-point line have a deeper bag because they did that than Jordan going to that fadeaway, going to that one dribble pull up, going to that, that reverse layup, doing all the things that Jordan could do that I mentioned earlier in the show? So, I think that that's important here. I think that sometimes the simple move in somebody's bag can be the most effective if the defense can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at somebody like Shaq, who didn't have the deepest bag. When we talk about big man bags, you look at somebody like Hakeem Olajuwon, indeed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as well, having that deeper bag. But look how dominant Shaq was in his athletic prime. And he did have some other moves apart from the dunk. You remember back in the day, Derek, there were some haters of Shaq who said, all he can do is dunk. And it reminds me of one of Shaq's comments back in the day where he said, if I can get the dunk 10 out of 10 times, I'm going for the dunk 10 out of 10 times. And why not? Look at Giannis these days, operating at the rim so effectively. To that point, if you do have that go-to move, if you do have that ability that will allow you to score so efficiently, so effectively, so often, you're absolutely going to go to that move, to that strategy. And we can talk about players having that deeper bag, and that is a point to make when we talk about, who is the most skilled, who has the most diverse offensive game or whatever. But yeah, if you are that good at a couple of things, and you can put them to good use that effectively, that often, you're not a terrible player.
Yeah, and I take that bag over any complicated bag where it's less efficient.
Absolutely. But once again, thank you to everybody who weighed in on this week's topic. As always, great to have you as part of the conversation, and please keep the conversation going. With that being said, that's brought us to the end of this week's show. Thank you for tuning in, and a reminder that you can catch us every week on the NLSC, our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Also, both we and the NLSC are on social media, and would appreciate a follow. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Hey, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on the NLSC D43 and on YouTube D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep a look to the NLSC itself, nba-live.com, for all things basketball gaming. So, thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.